This episode is proudly brought to you by Optimum Financial Services Group. Optimum has the expertise to guide you through investment, tax, retirement, and estate planning, with a tailored solution to your individual needs. Our objective is to provide you with an optimum solution to protect your wealth. Optimum has expertise in medical aid, legal services, asset finance, and short-term insurance, as well as specialized services in commercial, marine, aviation, and personal liability. Don't choose the average, choose Optimum. Optimum Financial Services Group is an authorized financial services provider. Well, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you once again for joining. My name is Alex McPhail. This is the High Performance Teams show, and I have an intriguing guest. We had a nice catch up in the last few days, and I'm hoping that this conversation picks up where we left off. Mark Taylor is the Chief Executive of New Capital. He is responsible for any investments in the order of $5 to $50 million in Africa, tailoring bespoke investments for foreigners with money to invest in great projects. He finds those great projects for you. What got my attention about Mark, he was the band manager of the legendary rock band Springbok Nude Girls in their heyday, and I want to find out all about that journey. And his post recently, which said managing private equity is quite similar to managing a rock band, and that's the bit that interests me. So let's get into it. Mark Taylor joins us now. Please stay with us. This is High Performance Teams. Mark, good afternoon to you. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Alex. How are you today?
Oh, I'm wonderful. I'm so pleased to have you on the show. It's something that I've been looking forward to for a while. We've been conversing over this for a while, and I'm not sure if you can pick up my tunes in the background there, just to set the scene. I can see the smile that you're hearing it already, because I can feel that same smile, and I'll get into that now. I'll just let this play for a moment. Unfortunately, technology-wise today, I try to play it through the computer, but I don't know these systems very well yet. But I do know this band well, and you know them even better, and that's what I'd like to dive into today. You can almost feel the energy starting right there. Okay, it's great music, and I can see with a smile. So let me just tell you this from the get-go. This sort of music, this album, these songs that I'm hearing, firstly, it was the sort of formative years of high school for me, this bubblegum in my boots, the last couple of years of school growing up in Cape Town. Then the other album that was some great music again, Afterlife Satisfaction. It was a time when I was in the Air Force and learning to fly. So this real sentimental but real entrenched memories, and you can associate music with what you were doing in your life at the time when you experienced the music. What is your experience with Springbok Nude Girls? How do you become a band manager of the top SA band, up and coming? They get into the stratosphere in South African music. How did that journey start for you?
Well, I've just come back to Stellenbosch from where I've been living in Amsterdam, working there. And I came back to join a businessman in Stellenbosch who spent his entire life in Stellenbosch, basically. And we were working in quite a rarefied atmosphere. And during that period, I think what happened was I have a great passion for music. And I came across the Nude Girls performing at a little pub. And I think in a way I was also looking for something just to balance the corporate setting that I was working in, something that was just perhaps a little bit dirty and crazy. So that was the attraction.
Where was the pub? Was it somewhere in Cape Town? I know you're from Germany.
It was just opposite the station in Stellenbosch called Upstairs. Okay. And they used to play on a Sunday evening there. They played for beers, to be honest. And they'd really just been together for a short while when I saw them perform. A friend of mine that I was at law school with said, "You've got to come and see this band." So we went and watched them one Sunday evening, and it was absolutely electrifying. There were 30 people stuffed into an attic, and this rubbery madman shaking around, and you had a trumpeter who hitting the keyboards, sort of had these cool grooves, this crazy Axeman lead guitarist, and this quiet sort of brooding bass guitarist, and then there was Francois on drums, just like a madman. It was crazy. It was great. I was absolutely electrified when I saw them perform. So I was a fan.
Yeah, fan in the beginning. Okay, so you come back from a big corporate life in Europe, and you come back to a slow-paced Stellenbosch, South Africa. This is definitely something very different. I mean, it's.
You should know, Alex. I was working as the assistant to a very, very successful and enormously impressive businessman in Stellenbosch, and we were doing business all over the place. I mean, he had extensive interests across Europe and UK, obviously part of Europe then, and South Africa. So, my corporate life was plenty hectic.
Okay, all right. So this is very different to corporate life. And as I played that little clip, "Bubblegum on My Boots" today, it's a great song, but there's a weird energy to it, as you described it. It's a perfect description. The rubbery man on stage, but that trumpet coming in, being in different notes, the voice, it's a great song, it's a great album, it's a great band and a great era, and I can see the appeal. How do you go from sitting there listening, giving the guys beers, to becoming a band manager? How does that connection start?
Well, my friend who took me there said, "Come on, Mark, why don't we offer to manage them?" And I said, "Well, firstly, I've got a full-time job. Secondly, I know nothing about music management." But he said to me, "But I used to run Radio Marti in the old days when I was a student at Stellenbosch. I was the hoofomroeper." And he said to me, "But you know about music, and you know about management, so music management." So we kind of stumbled our way into it. I got permission from my boss at the time to run it as a hobby. But we got very involved, I think, at a time when management was fairly primitive in South African music. And we were very passionate about it. We were well connected. I think we were moderately smart. I wouldn't like to overstate that, but we were able to find our way through some of the maze in the music industry and help the guys enormously. And we were passionate about the music, to be honest. I mean, it was about the music.
Sure. Okay. So what is a band manager? What does it entail? I mean, I can understand contracts and signing record deals, etc. But what is the day-to-day job of managing a band?
Well, I'm going to bring it back to your initial comment when I did write an article recently on the similarity between actually being a venture capitalist and
being sorry.
Right. The interface between being a venture capitalist, in venture capital, you're dealing with early stage deals. It's highly risky. Most of them are going to fail, to be blunt. Okay. Most bands for a record company are going to fail. So what happens is, you end up working with people who are incredibly talented and incredibly creative, in both as a VC with entrepreneurs and as a band manager with band members. And they have their own perspectives on life, which are not always completely normal. And I say completely normal, they're not routine. They're very often why they do what they do. And it means that you've got to work out how to deal with the human element of it. And that's probably the most important part of it. It's to draw out the best in the setting. All the contract stuff is hugely, music record company contracts are incredibly complicated. Understanding the royalty system, understanding the whole lot. There's a lot to think about. But at the end of the day, it's managing enormously talented, strong-willed people.
Okay, all right. Well, that similarity that is exactly the point. That your article was a timely article. I know it's referencing to a documentary that came out recently too, which is also doing the rounds. But okay, so managing people, whether they are investing in money, whether they're investing in themselves and their brand, that sounds simple. You simplified it quite easily in the way you've described it there. But what is the day-to-day? So I mean, they're going to the garage or the studio and they're recording. What are you doing at the time that they're working on their musical skills?
So most of the time I was slaving in the office for doing the work I was doing in Stellenbosch. But what we did do in the evenings, we'd have regular meetings with the guys. We gave them a lot of free rein. I realized when you've got an incredibly talented team, you sometimes as a VC and I've only ever managed one band. When you're a VC, you deal with a lot of entrepreneurs, and sometimes some of them you've got to give them their head. You got to let them go, let them run with what they're doing, and provide them with tramlines within which to work and ask them the grown-up questions that have to be asked every now and again. And I learned that certainly from VC. When you are, and you've got to be careful not to crush the creative spirit in an entrepreneur, and the same goes with the band member. So we gave them a lot of freedom, mainly because we just trusted their creative instinct, and I think that was, the rest of the time, we were doing, checking out contracts. We were in touch the whole time with Sony Music after we'd signed with them. We did run an auction with all of the record companies to try and get the best deal we could.
Was that an unusual thing? That sounds interesting. That doesn't sound like something that you normally do.
It hadn't been done before that I knew of. Certainly not in the white music industry. In the black music industry in those days, guys who were playing kwaito or gospel. I'm not sure if they had the opportunity. In those days, you kind of got told by the boss, this is how it's going to be. There wasn't up until until democracy. I imagine for a lot of the black artists, it was very much dealing with Boskap. So I suspect they didn't get a chance to run auctions quite like we did in this deal. But it was unusual. It was very unusual.
Okay, that speaks a bit to people are joining us now. Thanks, please, guys. Bring your questions. I'm going to put Tim Kelly on here from LinkedIn. He says, Mark, can you talk about the patience required to deal with and manage those individuals, band members on the one and strong-willed VC on the other? What kind of patience is required of you? You said you let them run a little bit.
Yeah, I think you have to have an incredibly honest relationship. You have to be able to be pretty hard without raining on the parade. I mean, I think that's if you can do that and you can do it without losing your compass, almost your moral compass in a way, your values compass, and guys trust you to do it and they know that you're doing it for the right reason. I think you have to be patient, but I think you also have to communicate well. And it's really difficult, and especially when you've got 5 band members who have their own there's politics. There's politics, within the band even. And when I say that, I don't mean the bad politics, but there are different people there, and they were a very, very talented bunch.
Okay, that's cool. Now, you joined them at a point with the way you described it. Had they not had any albums at all yet? If there were 30 people in a room playing for beers. Okay, so right from the beginning, that must be quite an interesting point to kick off. A bit like a VC, where this fledgling business idea. It's the very early stage.
They just started recording an album. They just recorded an album, but it hadn't been produced. And by the time we got involved, we had 500 albums pressed, and the guys were selling them at their gigs. And that was the very first album with bubblegum on it. I thought it was absolutely a singular achievement what they managed to get done there. And we sort of swept into that process, that time. And one of the other things we did was, I couldn't do the road management stuff. So we worked with a bunch of road managers, some really good guys we worked with. And at the end of it, as we'd been going for a few years, we pulled in a guy called Frani Kotze, who was an absolute breath of fresh air to what we were doing. Super smart guy, and tremendously committed to what he was doing. So that was very helpful. So we almost brought in a CEO, and then I kind of moved more into a non-exec chairmanship role, which was great. I didn't have to run around and count money at clubs and stuff like that.
So did you actually go to the venues too? You said you had a road manager. In the beginning, did you tour with the band too? Get in the bus, go up the N2, start hitting the garden route?
I did a few tours with them. I wouldn't go on tour with them completely, but I would go and pop in here and there when I was traveling. When we did the first trip to London, I did make a trip over with them to join them on that trip. They played the Mean Fiddler, played the Borderline, where the Beatles and the Stones played, and REM and U2 and all of those guys. Everyone played the Borderline. And,
it must have been some of those sort of surreal things, especially for South Africans. As South Africans, we tend to think of ourselves as a little bit less than whenever you go into some international stage, whether it's sport, business, academics, whatever it is. We have this view of ourselves as not quite on the main stage, and I think music must be similar. You're a South African band, you've made it there, but can you make it elsewhere? What was the reception like? I mean, I know that they did well on tour, but what was it? What did it feel like with you guys on the tour?
So what we noticed, I mean, there were a lot of South Africans at the gigs, and there were actually and a reasonable amount of Australians and New Zealanders. I think the sound in England at the time was quite clean and not so much formulaic, but I mean it was kind of boxed in a way. And if you listen to the Nude Girls, the biggest problem we had with them, I mean the single biggest problem I had with the Springbok Nude Girls, was that you couldn't put them in a box. It was also the greatest joy of working with them. So I couldn't put them in a box. You know, they got 1 minute you got an orchestra, then you've got a reggae tune, then you've got something that says wall of sound, punk, then you've got something that's actually a beautiful pop song that's been turned into a hard rock song, a ballad. I mean, it just wasn't something, you know, today these boxes don't exist, but in those days they wanted to know what kind of music is it rock? Is it reggae? Is it, what is it? And it just didn't fit anywhere. And it was very, very difficult to market as a consequence. And that was just a systemic feature of the music industry at the time. They wanted to put you in a box. And Nude Girls were impossible to put in a box. They really, really were.
Yeah, well, they were also, it felt to me at the time, as I was going back to my thoughts at the beginning, like you definitely associate music with a time in your life. You know, you have that, everyone's got that favorite album somewhere in the house. Doesn't matter when you play it. If you heard that when you were 16, when you were 25, when you were 40, that's where it kind of gets framed in your mind. A bit like a movie, I suppose, too. Whenever you think of that movie, whenever you see the movie or hear that music, you think of that time. And certainly Nude Girls has in very specific points in my career. I see Annabelle's joined us too. She was on pilot's course with me, and she would have no doubt heard a lot of the Springbok Nude Girls songs playing down the passageway from my bedroom. Thanks. She's saying very interesting. But okay, so at the same time, you're carrying on with your other work, and this is a sideline gig. How long were you the manager of the band for?
7 years. We started out in 95 and ran through to 2001. So we met up probably about April or May 95, and we ended up arranging a deal with them after about 2 months. And then the next trick was to try and find a record company, and also put the company into put the band, certainly handle the professional front for them, so that we were thinking about it from the business perspective, how they were structured, what they were doing, how the royalties were going to be split. I mean, think about it. You've got 5 guys writing songs. You had fundamentally the core creative writers in the band would have been Theo and Arno. Arno on the lyrics, Theo often on the tunes. And Adrian had an amazing training. I mean, he was very well trained classically, and yet the guys that like guys like Arno Blumer were really one of the smart guys in the band, actually, super clever guy. Would bring they brought. It's hard to explain, but they and François would have brought I suppose a steadiness and an understanding to the band where they were able to help tease out those things. So you've got to try and capture all of that in a commercial arrangement around every single song. I mean, how do you do that? So that was a big deal. And a lot of it's a bit like, how do you incentivize entrepreneurs? And how do you capture the fact that everyone makes a contribution, but some people make slightly more of a contribution on certain songs than others? And that was a nut we cracked quite well and quite cleverly. Well, cleverly, we're not overstated, but we managed to find a way to do that where the guys felt it was fair.
Now, how did you do that? Because that is interesting to me, because that's always a bone of contention. The person who wrote all the songs or the lead singer, they typically get the lion's share or feel they should. So how did you crack that nut? So
think about this from how do you incentivize staff even, because has always been a big concern of mine in any business I've invested in. So these things are relevant. The first thing is we said there was always a pot that everyone got a piece of. Everyone shared equally in a portion of the royalties from that song. And that was a good way to do it, because it meant that there was a certain, the guys weren't feeling cut out. Everyone got a piece of it. The second thing we said was that immediately after the song had been written, we'd work out who had contributed what, and we did it as a group. And so everybody said, well, so-and-so, but this is before it's been played in real life. So no one knows how well it's going to go down. Okay. It's not like it's gone to the top of the charts. You did it before that. And everyone says what so-and-so contributed. what so-and-so contributed, and then so you take the portion now you're divvying up, and you divvy it up amongst everybody according to their contribution, and that was how we did it, and because no one really, they might have had an instinct, but no one really knows until the song goes out there. I mean, we would try and guess which songs were going to be hits, and you just don't always know. It's just hard to tell.
Yeah, that is hard. I mean, it's a bit easier to understand this metric because I find myself doing this. I've been quite busy on social media for about 3 years now, and you do get to a point where you understand the rhythms of things, and much like a musician will, but you can still never tell. Like, you think track number 2 is going to hit it, and it's track number 7. You think this is a terrible track, and people love it. You've got a feeling, and you get closer to it, but you'll never quite understand what it is that clicks this thing off and that one not. And so to do it beforehand is very smart. That's interesting. And everyone was involved, so there was no comeback on.
No, it was an open conversation. How does everyone feel about this? We got a lot. It was a percentage of everyone gets a piece of it. So you're all in. Okay, right now who well, yeah, I was helpful, and the guys were generous with each other. They didn't sit there, trying to, I don't know, try to steal each other's ideas. It was a very collaborative environment, surprisingly collaborative, because it was 7 years together. I was involved. I think they were probably together for 8 years before they finally broke up formally on 9/11, by the way.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so of course they didn't get much airtime. It was a big deal in their lives, and they broke up, and everyone was glued to the TV. And wow, we didn't know that the Springbok Nude Girls had such an effect, and then everyone realized, well, it wasn't that actually.
Sure. Okay. But okay, so I wanted to ask you about that. So coming to the end, so you stayed on this journey until the journey wound up the first time, because I see they're back together again for the last while again once more. But is it just like a typical band that kind of goes its separate ways? Was it a common story? Nothing unusual? What leads to the separation in 01?
I'm probably not the best person to work out the life stages of the Nude Girls. It'd probably be better to ask the band members. But what happened was, the period we ran them, we were managing the guys. It was really trying to build a vision together and try to break them together overseas. What happened was, eventually, we realized that the sound wasn't getting heard in the right places in the right way overseas. They'd reached the pinnacle of what they were going to reach here, and it meant getting onto the road and not only trying to introduce people to their sound, but educate whole groups of fans or music listeners into the fact that you can actually be very, very diverse as a band, and that's okay. So that was that was going to be, you had to both create your market and then dominate it,
and then sell. Yeah,
it's difficult, it's a difficult thing for them to have done. And I think one Arno Bloom had a child. Was Igor had been born, and it just became, wow, this is going to be tough. And I think that it had been a hard run for the guys. And now what they do is they get together, but it's an ad hoc thing. They've recorded 1 or 2 albums, and they will do stuff together. And I think I was there for the formative period.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now that brings me to where our relationship, you and I, kicked off with, was your comment on. So, what led you to write this article then on LinkedIn a month or 2 back? What was your response on that? I presume quite good, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this is a weird thing. I wrote the little post just saying, well, I did this thing once in my life, and I managed this rock band, and they did
small little rock band, a small little band.
Well, they were a little band when we met them. I mean, they were absolutely unknown. I mean, we were, and it was yeah. So I suppose what happened was that when we started the journey, as I said, they were completely unknown. And sorry, can you just repeat the question? I'm sorry, Alex.
No way. No, so I mean, your post now you put on LinkedIn in the last 2 months, you've presumably got a nice positive response. So what made you want to do it? And
So I wrote a post to say, I manage this band, and maybe it's interesting because there's links to this between this and venture capital investment and even private equity investment, but backing entrepreneurs, basically. Backing entrepreneurs. And we had, I think, about 40,000 views on LinkedIn of that post. I mean, that's a lot of views in my life. I mean, I don't use social media very much, but I put a bit of stuff on LinkedIn now and again, and we write some really serious stuff about our business, really serious stuff that we think is quite profound. But you know, we get a percent of that number of views. It's a big deal. So it was interesting.
Okay. Well, I mean, 40,000 views is a lot, and it's quite a common thing. I'd like to zoom in there a little bit, but there's some questions coming through, and I want to just attend to some of the questions as well. So Jordan making a comment: surround yourself with talent and then leave them alone. He's referring to a previous interview where Jeff was suggesting that. Paul Hanna from LinkedIn is joining us, saying, Mark, do you find yourself being caught up in the artistic attraction of the nudies, or did you find yourself keeping an eye on the venture capitalist type of the KPIs?
You know, that's a great question. That's actually a great question. And I think what we did was we dialed into the passion of the music. We loved what they were doing, both Gerard and myself. Gerard Goos was my partner in this gig. He's a lawyer in Stellenbosch. And we really dialed into their passion and the music. And I think because we just naturally were that way inclined, we watched the bottom line and we watched the key issues. And when we went out to negotiate for them, we knew we were fighting for incredibly talented guys who were going to get screwed by somebody if we weren't around. I mean, they would have been. I'm convinced of that. Okay. They were just the politest, nicest guys when we met them. And the record company used to say, well, what do we do with these guys? You know, they don't throw TVs out of the window and smash the minibar into the swimming pool below. These guys are too nice. You know, we need some. so that was the sort of reaction. They were such nice guys. So the one thing I know, I think they ran the risk of being taken advantage of, which and I think you can ask them. We never did that. The other great thing about that experience with working with them was when I showed the article to a few of the band members, because I just wanted to get their input.
Mm-hmm. Was this before you posted it, or once you'd already posted it?
Well, no, before I posted it, I just wanted to check. You know, I just wanted to check that for them it was authentic, what I was saying. Yeah. You know, some guys are very revisionist when they write about. You know, I mean, I've read 2 autobiographies in my life, right? So this is why I don't take an autobiography seriously. I read It's Not About the Bike by Lance Armstrong.
Yeah.
So first big mistake, that was a completely revisionist. And the second one was Oscar Pistorius's Blade Runner. So I read 2 autobiographies.
You know how to pick them,
I worked as sportsman and ended up being nonsense. So I didn't want that to be the case. They looked at my article and said, "Jesus, this guy talks nonsense." But the remarkably kind thing that I heard back from was that I think that my article underplayed the role we played in trying to tease out the artistic endeavor by giving them the freedom and facilitating the creative process, but not managing it. Okay, so we provided the tram lines, we juggled them along. We got asked by the record company, "Can't we have more songs like this one?" And then we chat to the band and said, "If the record company's asked for this, how do you feel?" And they said, "No, we don't want to do that." I said, "Okay, go back to the record company and say, dreadfully sorry, guys, but the answer is no." So they said, "Okay, fine." You know, and so I had a very grown-up relationship with the MD of Sony Music, who happened to be an old schoolmate of mine. That was very helpful. And we had a very strong relationship with the band. So we were able to sort of translate music speak, band speak, into business speak. And that was a little bit like C-3PO in Star Wars, you know, the intergalactic translator. You take all this input and convert it into business speak. So let's speak over here about something, and then we go and speak to the record company and say, "No, they're saying this." And we put it into financial terms or whatever it was. And it worked well.
Okay, so these guys are, you know, the record label is throwing things at you and you managing that expectation. And jumping onto how it correlates to VC. So my father is joining, he's asking, assuming that you like the deal in venture capital, what is the VC hurdle rate?
Hurdle rate always depends.
Firstly, explain what is the hurdle rate, because maybe I'm also not quite following, but I understand that you'll fall over.
Yeah, for people who know perhaps put it back into music terms, because most people understand music. If you've got the record company will spend a lot of money producing the first album, and they've got to sell a certain number of records. And in some respects, you can see that if they've got to sell 3,000 records to get the money back on producing the record, you could almost say that 3,000 records is the hurdle rate to break even. And to make it worth their while, they need to sell 5,000 records. So you could almost say, in a way, that's what a hurdle rate is.
Okay.
But those who are more technically minded, a VC hurdle rate is typically the percentage return you want to get to justify all of the risk you're taking. And typically around those days, we were all so primitive. VC was a new industry in the 90s. It was Internet 1.0. Jeff Bezos was building Amazon. We were doing battle with Microsoft, we were competing with them with one of our deals and trying to get banking software into the market. And we looked for typically around 35% in those days. And I think that, at the end of the day, you end up with a situation where 1 or 2 successes out of 10 have to pay for a lot. So they need 35% returns. You got to target them, hope they get 50%, and you can write off the others. And that's just how it is. It's brutal.
So having lots of irons in the fire, and hopefully some of them will result in something.
Yeah. But it depends how early the deal is, Alex. I mean, to your father's point, if it's really, really an early stage business, more conceptual, you want a much bigger return. Sure. If it's not, and it's a little bit more mature, and the friends, family, and fools have all put their money in, and you're coming in as the first institutional investor, maybe you can tolerate slightly less return. But you're looking at you're looking for traction. You're looking for them to be able to prove their revenue model will really actually work. Can they really make money doing what they say they can do?
Okay, well, we'll talk about the possibilities offline as well, some investment. Okay, so I want to then sort of maybe step sideways, but keep referring back to how you see fit with the Nude Girls too, because we spoke about further studies, being a maritime lawyer. You talked about opening up an aquarium and catching sharks and all sorts of different things. So you've obviously learned quite a diverse set of skills in your time in various things in your adult life. So the lessons learned from managing a band and VC, etc., how does that translate into your futures thinking and what to study next and what projects to go on next? How do you come up with the idea of setting up an aquarium in Turkey? Although this might seem a little bit left field, I want to actually pull it from the story of managing a band, which is very left field, to setting up an aquarium, which is another left field thing. How do these things tie together?
So they tied together. They tied together. Can I tell you one funny story though?
Please do.
So I'm working for this very, very powerful businessman, and at a point he contacts me and says, "Look, my daughter is quite keen to watch the band perform in Cape Town."
Is this still the Nude Girls band?
The Nude Girls. Could you arrange? So I said, well, of course, we'd be delighted. I have to tell you, my blood ran cold. I said, of course, we'll definitely organize that, and we'll make sure she's looked after, and her name was on the list when she arrived with her friends, and they all got in, and all done nicely and sensibly. But what I never told Johan at the time was we normally had about 4 people on security. I phoned up the guys and I said, I don't care what it costs. I need at least 15 people on security. I want 5 people following. I want 5 people following his daughter right around. I mean, she mustn't see them; it'll spoil her evening. But I want security detail following her. And we blew the entire night's takings on security. But it's a game. It was a funny story in a way, but you do these things because it was the right thing to do. There was actually no upside in a way. You were only going to.
It sounds a bit like the hurdle rate of that is to spend all the takings to make sure they're safe.
It's like backing a black hole. But she had a good evening. and I kept my job. So going back to the aquarium, yeah. So I spent my life in corporate for about 15 years. I finished up doing a turnaround I was brought up to Durban to do a turnaround of a listed company, a tech company that got into a lot of trouble. And I spent 2.5 years sorting that out. And at the end of it, to be honest, I was so exhausted, I decided I was going to take a sabbatical. So I told the guys in Stellenbosch, I'd like to take a year off. It didn't really fit with the corporate plans. So it lasted about 2 days. And then I got a call from my wife's cousin in London saying, hey, Mark, wouldn't you like to look at what do you know about aquariums? I said, well, I don't know, but I know they got water in them and it's like fish. And I know that they probably lose a lot of money. So he said, no, I've got a great idea. Why don't we develop the first aquarium in Turkey? So
but why Turkey?
Because he met a guy who knew another guy.
There was an option. There was a possibility. It sounds like VC. A guy came to you with an idea and you thought, let's explore this thing.
So I did say to him, look, I'll consult you for a while because it sounds interesting, but I don't know anything about Turkey. I know nothing about aquariums, and I've never done a development. I broke 3 rules of investment doing that. So after a little bit of time, I started working out that the Turkish scene's different. This was in 2007. I started going to Turkey to develop this aquarium. And it's complicated. You're dealing with, there's a reason why the word Byzantine entered the English vocabulary, right? Byzantium is a complicated place to operate politically, and that's, now the modern day Istanbul. So that's how it started. I was introduced to the idea. I did some work on it. I found I had a bit of a talent for it. And I think some of that drawing off the Nude Girls and off the experiences I'd had in my career, both in financial, I did an M.Comm to try and persuade my colleagues I wasn't a lawyer. Otherwise, I always got given the law, all the legal agreements when we did a VC deal. And the legal background and just the idea of, having to think very laterally in the music industry and in the VC industry. I was very comfortable in trying to think about doing something I knew nothing about. I wasn't confident about it, but I was comfortable that I could navigate the waters.
Get yourself a team and stand out the way so they can carry on doing a good job. But it sounds to me a lot like the principle, if I bring it back to flying a complex modern airliner, in the order of 4,500 things can go wrong if you're flying on new Boeing or Airbus. Now, you can't possibly know what is going to go wrong and know everything. But what you can do is build yourself a framework and a tool set to be able to navigate something that gets thrown at you. And, you can basically do triage like you do in medicine, first order, second order, third order. Either way, you're using a framework. It depends on how much resources do you throw at it and how quickly do you respond. And it sounds to me like you build, the way you approach projects and your life is to use these frameworks, whether you formalize it or not. You're building some kind of a toolkit for yourself to tackle project A, which is a band or an aquarium in Turkey. Is that something that resonates with you?
Yeah, I think you've got to be really intellectually curious to do that kind of stuff. Many people are, but many people just simply aren't. So I think you have to be intellectually curious. You have to be very aware of what you don't know. I knew I didn't know very much. I knew nothing about aquarium. So you've got to almost be childlike in trying to understand it. Having said that, so what I've learned, and I've learned it more recently with the studies I've done, is the importance of having many mental models to use. You don't just want one mental model. You want to be able to look at something from many angles to really try and understand it and see whether it's going to work. And having said that, I wouldn't say I'm a genius at it. I think you want to get better than 50%, and then you're doing okay. Probably, if you get more than half your decisions right, you're probably doing okay. And so no one gets all of them right. So I think that the idea of a flexible mental model, thinking about things through various different lenses, is really important.
But now you mentioned this. It seems to me that this aquarium was a success after a number of years. You sold it, but you said along the way that there was an interesting story about how to lure or catch a shark, or what was the story about?
The story is how do you fill an aquarium with fish? So I will say just at the outset, when I was developing Aquarium, I hadn't really got my head around some of the issues that we would grapple with, some of the ethical issues. So I'm going to come back to the ethical issues. It's an interesting one. You really want to put a shark in a tank. Well, at the time, it wasn't a big part of my life to worry about it. But there's some quite big issues you grapple with ethically eventually when you really sit down and think about it. But what we did, we had to fill up the tank. We had about €1 million of fish, and we brought all these fish into. We were bringing all the fish into Istanbul, and we shipped 4 sharks, which had been caught in St. Francis, and been fattened in the Netherlands. I mean, that's how the industry works. And they were shipped over on the back of a flatbed. Each of the sharks inside a blue spun drum with a little pump in it, so the water would circulate. And for 2 days, they were driven across, and they arrived at our aquarium. Probably not that well off, but you put a little bit of a dosage of some kind of calmative sort of sedative in the water. So when they arrive, the idea is that they're a bit dozy. But now what's very important, so that so they don't get stressed, because the animals get enormously stressed on these trips. And so the idea is you put the fish in first, and they get into the water, and then they work out where the places are to hide, and they sober up, and after 3 days they are ready for the sharks. And then the sharks get brought in, right? And the sharks come in, and they're also a bit stoned, and you put them in the water, and eventually what happens is they work out that all the fish work out they've got big teeth. You've got to be careful of them. So this was the idea. Of course, logistics being what they are, it ended up happening that the sharks got there first. So you can't just leave them outside, stoned in you've got to put them in, right? So we put them in, they sobered up, and they cruised around, and they were all raggies, sand tigers, and they cruised around and sobered up. 3 days later, the fish arrived. So now we've got all these stoned fish being put into a tank with frisky sharks. We're now by this stage fairly hungry, right? So we put the fish in. Well, what do? I mean, you can't keep the fish either. So you've got to put them in the water. So we put them in, and we were in huge trepidation, and we watched all day. And nothing happened. It was calm, peaceful. The sharks cruised around. Everyone was chilled. It looked like this is like world peace, And anyway, so we went home that night and turned off the lights. You know what happens? Sharks hunt at night, right? Came back the next day, a third of the fish were gone. They were gone. Hundreds of thousands of euros. It was crazy. And then
you just fed the sharks.
and then on top of it, my auditors come to me and they say, Mark, we now have to work out. We suggest we do a study on whether these fish were they an operating cost because they were food. Were they a capital cost, and did they, do we have to revalue them? I said, well, they're getting fatter and bigger, so they must be an appreciating asset. And we had to think, they want to do a big study to work out how to depreciate the fish and how to treat them as an operating cost. I said, guys, geez, really, I've got an aquarium to run and fish to keep alive, and so it was quite funny.
Nightmares you've never thought of before. Just spending all your money with part of your assets, eating the other part of your assets. We're getting some comments through relating to both the nude girls and the tanks, the shark tank, that is. The nude girls should sing in a tank. That's from Richard. How about that for an idea?
Well, it wasn't far from my mind. In fact, I got a call while I was in Turkey, just after the Springboks had won the Rugby World Cup, from Johan to ask me, can you get the nude girls together? We've won the Rugby World Cup. I'd like the Springbok Nude Girls to play to the Springboks on one of the farms in Stellies. And what happened was I'd actually contemplated it might be quite fun to bring them over to perform at the aquarium. We had 1 million people through that aquarium in the first year. And quite a funny story about it was, and another thing, in humility in business. You have to always keep your feet on the ground. And I learned this other thing, and that was, we were filling up the tank, right? So how do you fill up a tank of 7 million liters of water? What do you just turn the taps on? How do you fill it up? Difficult stuff. So we had tankers coming up from the Marmaris Sea, coming up with 100,000 liters at a time and dumping them in the tank. And so they come in salty already. So we filled up the tank. We got it to about 3/4 full, and my colleague from Durban, Roger, and myself, we flew over one night on Turkish Airlines. We got there in the morning, 6 o'clock at Ataturk Airport. We trained through to the shopping mall where we had our aquarium. It was the biggest shopping mall in Western Europe. And we said, well, we're going to have a swim. We're going to be the first guys ever to swim before the sharks arrive. We're going to swim in the tank. So we got our cameras and gave it to some of the workmen to take a few photographs of us while we were in the tank, and jumped in, and we were squirting water out and swimming around, and just having a lot of fun. And we noticed that they weren't laughing with us, right? But they were laughing, and they were laughing at us. So it was a bit funny. So I get out, and we go across to get showered, and I go through and I see Gulna, who's my general manager. She was running the aquarium, or so she was running the marketing at the time. And I said, Gulna, we've just had a swim. And she gets a little smile on her face. I said, Gulna, why are you laughing? Everyone's been laughing. She said, well, Mark, it's like this. All of the water that's coming up does not have enough ammonia in it. So to rectify the ammonia problem, all the guys on the work team have been told they've got to pee into the tank. So where we've been swimming, every workman had been peeing into the tank where we'd been swimming and squirting. And I said, oh my goodness, that's crazy. So she said, yeah, and on top of it, now you're not allowed to go to the toilet either. You've also got to pee in the tank. So you never know when you have people working for you, just what role they really play in your lives.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. But just on that point, there's some more comments coming. I'll get to your questions and comments now. You're talking about, did you say it was 7 million liters, the tank?
Yeah.
So, I mean, when we fill that large Airbus 340-600, 150,000 kilograms, around just under 200,000 liters of fuel, there's a seriously high-pressure bowser that connects under the airplane, and it's 2,500 kilograms a minute. We could spend 45 minutes filling up an airplane, and that's only 200,000 liters. If a tanker arrives, one of those petrol tankers, they're fairly big. That's about 30, 40, 50,000 liters. So your 100,000 liter tankers coming through, firstly, they must be massive. And secondly, there must be this continuous train of trucks that are arriving for a week.
There's a queue of trucks coming up, and there may have been 50,000 liters. So I may have exaggerated the size of them, but it was basically filled up from the Marmara Sea. And then subsequent to that, we used Red Sea salt and water out of the tap. I mean, we had a tap once,
Yeah, I got to fill it up. But sure, that's quite an endeavor to fill up 7 million liters. So Rod's joining us again, saying, how would you define the differences between adventure capital, venture capital, and project finance?
So I think adventure capital is probably more of a prosaic term than anything else. In a sense, I mean, I think adventure capital has a couple of meanings which are quite. There's a bit of a romance around it, but ultimately venture capital for me, VC is early stage investing, and it's investing in something that there's a high risk of failure, and it's not fully formed, often pre-revenue. Well, typically not necessarily pre-revenue, but it certainly could be certainly pre-profit, almost certainly pre-profit. So it'll be revenue generating typically, but only a little bit. Project finance as a separate gig is really you're financing a specific project. So what's very similar is that both of them are startups technically, but the difference between a startup where you have a VC fund, an entrepreneur starting a new payment technology business, that is that's an endeavor where there is where there's no formal track record necessarily that relates to that specific activity. Whereas with project finance, you may have put together three members of a team of a consortium who are going to do a solar farm. And they've built 5 solar farms before, but never together in this particular company. So they're both technically startups, but the one has got a very, very proven track record and the other doesn't.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So new capital now, I know this is now a couple of your latest thing is the new capital. Is that still then venture capital, or is it a bit more specific now? What is new capital?
We don't really do venture capital very much for structural reasons. I mean, at the end of the day, what we do is we're like a Tinder for African capital. So we'll connect investors around the world who are looking to place $5 to $50 million US into Africa and are clean, by the way, which for us is important. There's enough clean business in Africa not to have to do the dirty stuff. And so we try to identify those investors. And I'm going to guess there's probably 1,000 investors who might do that kind of thing across the world, of which about 500 probably fall into our target. And we connect them with deals that we identify. We originate deals and we connect them together and let them and hopefully they're able to do a transaction. We don't do the strict advisory work. We don't prepare the financial models and write the information memorandums and do all of the due diligence. We just connect people, literally like a matchmaking business.
So this comes back to the comment earlier on LinkedIn, and it's a great platform for connecting people, certainly on a professional level, and even if you share your personal experiences of a different nature, you do resonate with the people that you're connecting with too. And
yeah, I mean, I agree with it. I think that LinkedIn is a tremendous networking tool, but at the same time, you've got to be authentic if you're going to do anything. And I think on LinkedIn, and I think if you've got no network, to build a deep network on LinkedIn, kind of difficult. A deep network as opposed to a broad one. But if you've already got relationships or you've got a big time reputation, you might be able to do that, especially if you've got existing relationships. And I think that's perhaps one of the differences. You can go broad on LinkedIn, quite hard to go deep.
Yeah, that's true. We've got some more comments. Father-in-law, Jock Hubert Dennis, coming in. He says, "Hi, Alex and Mark. Great to hear Mark still laughing about rather serious times in his life. The story about swimming in the fish tanks and things." So Jock is also interested in the sort of maritime thing. So we haven't even talked about maritime law, but we're coming towards the end. I don't know if you want to start a conversation on maritime law, but is it an area that you still use? Is law still a part? Does it come into contracts now? I mean, why did you choose maritime law, and how applicable is it today?
Yeah, I practiced law with at the time what was the biggest shipping law firm in Africa, Shepstone Wylie, and it was a great deal of fun. It was really, really fun to do. I mean, amazing stuff that we worked on. But and I studied. I did a postgrad diploma in maritime law and did well in it. But when I left law, I was actually quite happy to leave. I moved into banking and found my straps more in at the time in property finance. I found my straps there, and that was probably nice to merge the two. I mean, law was the best thing I ever did was get out of law, but the second best thing I probably ever did was get into it. It was a great training. It teaches you a lot about human beings, human behavior, kind of stuff that I think can be important in business.
But also another thing I noticed, having spoken to people, because you're not the first person to say, glad I did it, but also glad I'm not in it anymore. But it does seem to teach a work ethic and a skill set of being able to get through volumes of work, or not, maybe scanning is not the right word, but to get through a chunk of work and finding out what's the important part in this chunk of work. So the sort of loose concept of scanning through something, but getting the meat out of it. It seems to be a skill that's highly developed in law. I don't know, would you agree with that thought?
I think you do learn that you've got to be able to, when there's a long story taking place, you've got to follow the golden thread, and you become good at that. I do think that's really important if you're putting together a case or particulars of claim or something like that. And I think the other thing that's useful, the risk in law is that so often, especially if you're dealing on the more litigious side of law, is that you become risk averse, because every deal that goes sour ends up in court, right? Or ends up in a fight, and lawyers get involved. So, you can either be on the creative side, on the commercial side, or else you can get quite, it's like banging your shins at night on the coffee table. You get a bit gun shy, I think, if you spend too much time in litigation. And I think that was one of the things that was worrying me, that eventually I might become too risk averse, too busy trying to cover every risk in law and never getting a deal done. And that's a risk. There's a risk. You see it amongst lawyers sometimes. They're great thinkers, but not always. Sometimes that's a danger.
A danger too, yeah. Well, I mean, so it's a 55-minute conversation punctuated with these great stories and projects in your career so far, Mark. What's the next thing? So what's happened? You've been doing this a while now. What's the next crazy adventure, like a Nude Girls, an Aquarium, or something different? Is there something that's going to pull you left field once more on the horizon?
Well, I'd like to play this role of facilitating capital efficiently in Africa. I think it's a really important mission, to make sure that capital flows into the best deals and the most appropriate deals in Africa. I think that's useful skill, useful value add. But I think, I studied in 2017. I studied futures at not financial futures, but futurism, as it were, and I found that was intriguing, and it opened my mind to the fact that no matter how old you get, and I'm pushing it a little bit now, no matter how old you get, you should never stop learning, and if you stop learning, you die. I mean, that's my view. I really, really believe it, and I think sometimes you learn on the job, sometimes you learn through relationships, sometimes you learn through doing crazy things, I don't know, free diving or skydiving, doesn't matter. And sometimes you learn by going to university and testing yourself against the best and putting yourself in the presence of great, of wonderful thinkers. And I think that's something I don't ever want to lose.
Certainly, you have a good track record of academics as well. Having done a couple of degrees and some postgrad diplomas and done very well in them too. But I just want to challenge you on this thought of learning. I mean, you could pick up any book from any bookshop. You could go online, Udemy, online Khan Academy. You could just do some reading. You could do your own deep dive in anything. Why do you choose to do postgrad diplomas rather than any other method? Is there an attachment to the certificate too?
I think the real thing is, a friend of mine told me about the course, and she just finished it, and I was blown away when I heard what she was dealing with, because it was something I suspected all the way through my studies as a youngster at Stellenbosch in the late 70s, early 80s, through to at different times, and I'd never come across it. I'd never heard of systems thinking, certainly not soft systems thinking. And what I found out was that the opportunity to be lectured by somebody who has a deep knowledge and be able to engage with them, that was an amazing experience. And have around me, I was one of the oldest guys in the class, have around you young, dynamic people who come from, many of whom were, it was very diverse culturally. To have people like that around to just test everything you thought was normal or was you held dear. Everything got tested. And you don't get that by picking up a book, and you don't get it by watching YouTube. You can learn to code in Python. Mm-hmm. on YouTube or on the internet. You can Google it. But that's different. That's a technical skill. But to think, to be challenged, to have people throw arguments at you that you just went, wow, I never thought of it like that. Never ever thought of it like that. And that to me is the great pleasure of that particular course I did and of the university process. But no, you don't need to do university to get to be well trained. But for that kind of stuff, it's great for that.
So that goes to the current state of affairs, where there's online learning, and universities aren't what they were. Do you think there's a place for everything to go back to a little bit more of what we consider university? Go to campus, go to lectures, attend classes. Do you think that's never going to go away, based on your last thoughts?
It will go away one day, I'm sure. I think it'll be a sad day when it disappears completely, because I do think there's a rite of passage of being a first-year student, and I think, and I mean, my son's just finishing his first year. He didn't have a first year at UCT. Sure. Been at home with his folks. I mean, horrors, poor guy. And missed out on the kind of stupid stuff we all did. So I think that's I think so long as you can have an online experience where you can test and challenge without it being done on Twitter in 140 characters, which is well, there you go. You can't really take on it, and without sort of populism and conspiracy theorists. I think if you can have open and honest conversations, that's if you can do that online and create the environment for it, then it's got a future.
Okay, so I mean, your son didn't get that UCT first year, go down to the Troubadour on Cork Bay and listen to the Nude Girls. That's not a good first year. It's varsity. my first live concert with the Nudies was at the Troubadour in Cork Bay. It was wonderful, and really enjoyed that. Great little hangout there. I'm from Fishhook, so nice little local spot too. Mark, it's been wonderful chatting. I think it's a good place to leave it, but I think we could have spoken again some more about future. So maybe next time when I'm in your part of the world, we go for a surf and a coffee, and we can talk futures and books and learning and all things. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an awesome privilege to share your insights, and I look forward to catching up with you again one day.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thanks very much for your time.
Cheers. Folks, thanks for joining. It's been an interesting, wide-ranging conversation all about the band members, etc. Please remember to subscribe, share, like, and stay again. Until next time, stay safe.